Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis today, we'll be discussing 6 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. Good morning to all of you. Now, today's newspaper was interesting because we had very contrasting types of editorials and we picked up 3 out of those. One which is in the news quite a lot, and we discussed this last week also. Thereafter, the IIM Bill, which is in purview, and then an amendment to the Forest Conservation Act, again a very significant thing. All 3 are bills and they're in the news, so they are very, very important for us. 2 for GS paper 2 and 1 for GS paper 3. Thereafter, we'll go into the Prelims Bytes section, which are smaller sections but important. GI tags being given to some of the products and the craft coming out of Rajasthan and Goa. Then we'll talk about the birth registration concept, which has been now given the assent from the Lok Sabha itself. And thereafter, we will talk about the MGNREGS scheme and how West Bengal is reeling under a lot of problems because of the money which has not been dispersed to it by the center itself. So 6 topics. Some based on the basic understanding of prelims, some based on mains. Before we go into the first topic itself, as always, I will give you the basic overview of the bill, the basic changes which are happening, and then we'll go into the nitty-gritty of the whole concept itself. So let's discuss the first topic, which is the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, or the DPDP Bill as we are calling it, DPDP Bill. Now, if you remember, last week we discussed 2 major issues in the DPDP bill as it is under purview of the Parliamentary Standing Committee. There was a major controversy recently because when this bill was sent to the Standing Committee itself, the opposition leaders or the people who are dissenting were not shown the bill itself, and over and above that, this is a contagious bill because of the provisions which are there generally. So the 2 things which we were able to identify last week were, first, that non-personal data was not part of the purview of this bill itself, and we saw how reconfiguration, realignment or reapplication of this non-personal data could in turn lead to revealing certain personal data, which is basically protected under the bill itself. So therefore, non-personal data, as it is not protected, can be reused to get personal data. Now, the second thing which we saw was that the Data Protection Board, which is going to be formed, was not given any form of teeth, in the sense that it could not take suo moto or on its own take complaints. Basically, it had to be instructed by a complainant, by the center, by the judiciary or by any other body, but it could not in itself or automatically take cognizance of an issue and thereafter work on it. And that was a major issue because data breaches we don't get to know also. So the Data Protection Board needed to have more power in that sense. These are the 2 things which we discussed last week. Now this article adds to it and brings in the most contagious and the most problematic aspect of the DPDP bill, which is that within it there is also a provision which is going to amend the RTI Act or the Right to Information Act, which is considered one of the most important hallmarks and bedrocks of democracy in India today, which is the right to get information out of governmental bodies and the broad definition of any body which is supported by the state. Now, what the DPDP bill does, and this is where it is going to become problematic, is that within the RTI Act, there is a section. Now please pay attention. Under the RTI Act, there is a section called 8(1)J. Now, as much as you have right to information, you also have right to privacy. In the sense, there is the Right to Information Act and you have a fundamental right that you have a right to privacy. Now, in order to balance these issues, the RTI Act has a certain section which is 8(1)J, which says that if you are asking for certain information and if your personal data or the personal data of anybody involved is not necessary for this information, then for the right to privacy, that personal data will not be disclosed itself. Try to understand this. I have asked, for example, the marks of the first 3 toppers of a college, for example. Now, maximum I need their names. But I have asked for marks. So the RTI officer can just use 81J and say that because the personal data of the student is irrelevant to the information asked by me, therefore I will only tell the marks, which is that the first ranker got, for example, 700, the next one got 698 and the next one got 650. This is the information I asked, and I will not give the names of the candidates because that is a breach of their privacy. This is the concept of 81J, which is the right to exemption. You can get exemption, or the body can exempt or not give personal data vis-a-vis when the provided information is complete in itself, that you don't need the personal data itself. So first you tell me this, that do you understand the concept of 81J, which is the exemption clause, which is that 81J, if personal information is not needed, it is not disclosed, and therefore it exempts the information out of a personal information. This is the first point you need to understand. If this is clear, then we'll go into the contagious clause of how RTI Act is being amended. Yes or no? Come on. Yes, perfect. Now, what the DP Act is doing, understand this. 81J says if the information is complete in itself and personal data is not needed, therefore personal data will be exempted. It is a balance between the right to information and the right to privacy. Now, what the DP Bill does is it expands the concept of 81J and it gives executive power to the government of India to even exempt bodies or institutions or even private bodies. Basically, they have taken a very good concept and now they've expanded it to say that through a notification, the government of India, for example, can notify that the Aadhaar or the UIDAI is exempted from RTI. Basically, it now has the power, or for example, BHEL has, or MTNL has. Very simply, under the DP Bill, the government of India can, through a notification, exempt bodies, institutions, organizations, private bodies also, from the RTI Act itself. Therefore, they are not compliant or they are not liable to give information. And this is extremely dangerous. Because now what the government can do is that it can protect, and there is politics, it can protect certain institutions and it can expose certain institutions to the RTI. RTI is a very important tool which you and me have, and if the RTI is curtailed and certain bodies are taken out, it becomes problematic. So therefore, the first major contagious clause, if passed and if introduced in this form, would be that RTI purview could be reduced through governmental notification. This is the first point, wherein the government now gets the power to exempt institutions. Is this clear? Then I'll go to the second point. It could be security, it could be corruption, anything. Sure, it opens up, transparency and accountability goes away. Okay. Now, the second clause, which is also problematic, is the fact that it is related to the Digital Protection Board only. The Digital Protection Board, we know that it does not have suo motu powers, it does not have the right to take cognizance in itself. However, what we see is that this is also not autonomous. Every member of the DP board will be actually appointed by the government itself. Now, there is certain information which could be uncomfortable for the government itself, and if the DP board is just government employees or people who are appointed by the government, they can then protect the government itself or a certain institution itself. So very simply, the DP Bill already had a problem. Non-personal data not under purview, the board itself was useless. Now what we see is that because it wants to add the RTI exemption to institutions, which can be done through the basic notifications, it is creating a new Pandora's box in which Government of India, not governments, but the basic Government of India can exempt any body, private or public, from the RTI purview itself, and over and above that, the board for which you and me can go and say that we have been cheated is also controlled by the government. So the question is about governmental control. It's about the concept that how much executive power is enough or when does it become too much. So this issue, which is related to GS paper 2 basically, is about governance, it's about executive power and the aspect of how certain bills which are empowering us today or give us protection against the executive action itself, and right to information is the bedrock of all democracy in India. The RTI Act getting amended within the DPDP bill is also in itself a tactic which the government is using in order to not derive a lot of attention, because it's internally put. It's not a very out there exhibiting a lot of controversy. They just added a small clause within the DPDP bill so that it does not attract a lot of attention, but the civil society has noticed this major change which is going to happen to 81J. So before we go to the nitty-gritty, I'm repeating myself, pay attention. First, DPDP bill has been in the news. Last week itself we discussed it. Two major issues we discussed previously. So I'm trying to create a continuity in CNA because it tends to become islands. What I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to bring in, this is how you read a newspaper. That in the sense that a newspaper does not have new news every day. It builds on the same thing. So on what I think 21st or 22nd of July, this was the news which is DPDP bill is problematic. And the two issues which we saw there were non-personal data not being protected and the DP board more or less being a slave to the fact that it cannot create a complaint on itself, it has to be given a complaint. Now today's article adds to the DPDP bill two further issues. It amends the RTI Act 81J and the concept of right to privacy or the concept of exemption is now being expanded via the Government of India through a notification can now exempt bodies both public and private. And in the end, it is also not autonomous because all the chairmen and all the what we call as machinery within the Digital Protection Board is, or the Data Protection Board is going to be appointed by the government itself. So it's about executive power, it's about governmental control, it's about transparency, it's about accountability. Because RTI dilution, and this is the larger issue which you've seen, it now become more or less a static concept, that the dilution of the RTI has now become a major issue. And the RTI had very beautifully balanced right to information and right to privacy via 81J. Now that section is being misused. If this is clear, then we will go into the smaller details and what the article is actually telling us through these details. Yes? Okay. So let's talk about it. So the Digital Personal Data Protection DPDP bill is most probably going to be introduced within either this week or next week in the Parliament itself, and it was with the Parliamentary Standing Committee. However, the bill in its true form was not disclosed to anybody in the meeting itself or the committee itself, and therefore now there are certain questions on what are the contagious provisions within the DPDP bill that the government is not trying to show it. Now, the Data Protection Bill of 2022, basically this one which is going to be now introduced in 2023, we'll call it DPDP only, has a provision to amend the Right to Information Act. Since 2005, it has been a major moment, a major milestone in our democracy. Now, within it, there is a major section, the RTI Act 81J, which tries to harmonize or bring together the concept of right to information and right to privacy. And basically, it's called the exemption clause. Now what does this exemption clause say? Now this is the technical wording which I told you in very simple language. Personal information is exempt from disclosure if it has no relationship to any public activity, no relation to any public interest, or if the information sought is such that it would cause unwarranted invasion of privacy and the information officer is satisfied that there is no longer public interest that justifies this disclosure. Very simply, I have asked for certain information, and if that information is going to either attract too much attention or breach your or mine privacy, then he is not going to, the information officer is not going to disclose it. Over that, if the information is complete in itself without the personal information, then the personal information is omitted. Basically, do not create a situation in which your right to privacy is breached via right to information. This is the balance which 81J gives, but this is mostly for individuals. It is not for institutions. Now, how are they misusing this clause? Because now the DPDP bill is expanding the purview and trying to make sure that all personal information can be not disclosed, and over and above that, with the government being the biggest repository of data itself, and it should not have so much power over executive action generally, the DPDP bill now empowers the government that through certain notifications, it can actually exempt its bodies, even public or private bodies generally. So for example, the government can just simply say that the UIDAI is not part of the RTI. And it can also expose certain NGOs, certain bodies which they want to target or don't want to target, but generally they are under the stringent control of the RTI, but other bodies are not. And therefore it creates now a new regime in which through a notification certain bodies are exempted from RTI and certain bodies are not. And this is the problem. Therein you can selectively protect certain bodies, certain institutions, and therefore this is a major moment in the dilution of RTI Act, because it will create problem in the larger perspective. On the other hand, there is also one more issue, which is that the Data Protection Board in itself is generally or is going to be constituted by the central government. So the strength, composition, removal, selection process, everything. And the chief executive officer of the Data Protection Board is also going to be appointed by the government. And therefore, if we have a problem with, for example, MTNL or BSNL being within the RTI, outside the RTI purview, where do we go? We go to the Data Protection Board. But the Data Protection Board is constituted by the Government of India itself, and therefore very simply it creates a chain of, or what we call as domino effect, in which everybody goes out of the purview and you are again back to the same point where you cannot actually seek information. So before we go on to the second topic, let me give you a basic overview. Till this point everybody is following me, you're getting the basic nitty-gritties and the points which have been made in this article itself. Yes? Okay. Now, let's try to consolidate everything. How do you process all of this and write it in the examination, for example? So, we know RTI Act is there. Within RTI Act, we have 181J, which basically is an exemption clause wherein your personal data is protected if it is not needed as part of the information. Now, the DPDP bill has been in the news for quite a long time. The DPDP bill has basically four major issues. We have discussed two of them previously, wherein non-personal data is not protected, but this can be reconfigured to create a position in which non-personal data is also giving personal data. Second, the issue was that the Data Protection Board did not have the power to take cognizance of issues. It can only take complaints. Only take complaints. Now, two more we add today, which is that 81J has been expanded to basically now give the Government of India the power to notify and exempt institutions, both public and private. And last but not the least is that the composition, the selection, the dismissal, or rather we'll say removal of the Data Protection Board, all is with the Government of India. And this creates major ethical issues. And therefore, there are two basic aspects to this story. One is related to governance, the other one related to accountability, and over and above that, which is the dilution of RTI. Now, if all of this makes sense, we'll move on to the second article. Yes? So this is again something which is developing. We may be adding points to this story further as we go on in this week or later. Okay, perfect, great. Now we move to another very interesting case, which is governmental control where it is positive. There we saw governmental control negative. Here we are seeing governmental control positive. See, now we are talking about the Indian Institute of Management, IIMs, IITs and IIMs, the pinnacle of education in India itself. But now there's an amendment which is going to change a lot of things for a bill which was passed in 2017. Again, let me give you a basic understanding of what is the structure right now. So in 2017, the Government of India introduced the IIM Bill, or IIM Act you want to call it. And basically, it was a major moment in the story of management studies and IIMs, because the government very simply took away its control out of the IIMs. It said that for IIMs to grow, governmental control is not needed. This was a consensus which was created by the IIM and the Government of India. And generally the Government of India in 2017 was very, very open to the fact that for its autonomous development or for its development, autonomy is important. Unlike where we see the IITs, there's still a lot of control of the state and the central government. IIM, it was believed that let us do one thing, let us take away our power and let's see how it develops. So the 2017 rule very simply said that out of the 4 members which should have been nominated by the government, this was reduced to 2 in what is called the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors is the most important body which is there. It generally appoints the director, it generally appoints the chairman, and any dispute, everything which happens within the IIM itself, very simply is based on the Board of Governors. And within the Board of Governors, the Government of India reduced their position or their presence to 2, and more or less it was made autonomous. So what we believe is that the IIM structure was more or less autonomy based or autonomous, and very simply the Government of India did not play a major role in any of the appointments itself. Now, what the Government of India wanted in return of giving up its power was that every 3 years the Board of Governors should review and submit a report on the performance, on how they're using the money, generally how the institution is working. This is what the Government of India wanted from the IIMs, that you give us this basic report. Now, in the past 6 years, except for IIM Bangalore or Bengaluru, the other IIMs have not submitted this report. only IIM Bangalore has actually submitted this report. Other IIMs have just given up on that. Now this has created a certain position in which the government of India is now forced to change. More than that, in the past 3 years, there has been a lot of conflict between teacher-students versus the Board of Governors, director versus students, director versus alumni. Generally, there's a lot of tension which is building up within the IIMs over management issues, over governance issues, and basically what the government of India thought was that if they will remove governmental control, maybe it will help in autonomous exponential growth or generally growth which is mitigated by internal factors. Here, the story has become extremely problematic. Why? Because firstly, the reports are not being submitted by the IIMs. Over and above that, the biggest issue is that by not submitting this report, basically there is now an opaqueness. How are the IIMs getting governed? Where is the money going? How are they using the money within the institution itself? All of this was to be through the report itself, which none of them are submitting. And therefore, the IIM Bill, which now is going to be passed, or IIM Act of 2023, this is going to change the whole structure. And this is going to be a game changer because now the government is creating a very important position, a visitor's post. This visitor's post is going to be given to the President of India. And now the visitor will have the power to appoint the director, appoint and remove both. Further, it will have a say in the board of governors. Further, no appointment will be able to be done or no appointment will happen without the assent of the visitor. Very simply, this is a central university model, wherein in central universities, state universities go under governors, central university, the visitor basically is the President of India. And herein, very simply, the IIMs do use, that's a good question, Ashu, that IIMs do get grants from the government of India. And therefore, that grant, where it is going, the government of India has no idea. And that is the point where this whole system is problematic. Wherein the IIMs are using government of India money, but they are not giving us a clear picture. It's again about governance, transparency and accountability. So now the new structure which I'm going to discuss in more detail through the PPT itself, the point is about taking back the power from the IIMs and now keeping it with the government of India. Now there are two very simple, straightforward questions. Is this good or is this bad? I leave it to you. We can debate it over this, that how do you think this is going to be a positive or a negative? You can comment about that do you think that this is needed or it is not needed? Good, bad, needed, not needed? Is it going to create a lot of governmental control? Most of you are writing good because you understand the governance issue here. At the end of the day, the taxpayer money is going into these institutions. See, that is for you to decide. Is this much governmental control good or this much governmental control bad? The point is, how does the government of India use this position and how does it impact the governance of IIMs is something to be seen. So very simply, I leave it here. Let's see how it impacts them in the larger perspective. As of right now, the government of India has now made a basic understanding, a basic resolve that we will take back power in that sense. So if you understand the basic issue, then I will go into the next aspect, which is to understand the nitty-gritty. There are sections, there are certain things which are there, and we can talk about that also. Needed, but complications will increase. See, one thing is that governance issues within IIM will go away because most of the tussle is between teachers and students, or teacher students versus the governance, or the management versus the students. That will get resolved because here there is no vested interest which the government of India has. Okay, perfect. So 2017, the Parliament passed the Indian Institutes of Management IIM Act, which basically expanded their autonomy, which was already enjoyed quite a lot by them. It requires the Board of Governors of the IIMs to commission and have an independent review of the institution at least once every 3 years and place the report in public dominion. This is the problem where the IIMs are not doing anything. The IIMs had to put in this report every 3 years, once every 3 years, and that has not happened in that sense. Now, 6 years on, only IIM Bangalore has actually made such a report available. Others are not actually even putting the money to do it also. So the act of omission gives us the indication why the government now wants to basically bring back the power to its purview, and this non-compliance by the IIMs, which is basically their own issue, is now the problem. So the 2023 bill seeks to take back from the IIMs the power that the government ceded in 2017, and the government seems to have judged that a dangerous governance vacuum, this is a very important word, has been created in the IIM system, and this is the problem. The IIMs are now acting in their own understanding, in their own basis itself. Basically, they are now arbitrarily taking decisions which are not good for the students or for the faculty. Now, the problem with the 2017 bill was also that there was no meaningful check and balance, no meaningful check and balance on the governors, no meaningful check and balance on the director or on the appointment of dean, and this has created a lot of tensions within IIMs, which is not good for the premier institutions of governance and management in India. Now, what did the 2017 bill say? The 2017 bill very simply said all key appointments, the chairman, board of members, directors and the chairperson of the coordination forum of the IIMs were left to the board of governors. Basically, the board of governors were literally the main power center and they could do anything, and the presence of the government was reduced to 2 from 4. Now, this is what you have to remember. Please pay attention. This is the new structure. This is where we pay attention. The 2023 bill now undoes all of it. It creates a post of visitor, which is the President of India. The visitor will appoint the chairperson of the board of governors, one nominee for the selection committee of director, and the chairperson of the coordination forum. Basically, now anywhere there is an appointment, the visitor of the President of India will have a nominee. Further, he or she will approve all directors' appointments, and the visitor can initiate any review, inquiry, and remove or appoint directors on his or her own. Basically, now the President of India, very simply, is going to be the main power center. So they shifted the power. It was board of governors, now it is going to be the visitor's position, which is nothing but president. And basically the president is going to act in the advice of the government of India, the prime minister. So basically the government has now taken control of the management of IIMs itself. Now, what is the significance? Again, pay attention to what I am going to now discuss with you. Are we clear with regards to the nitty-gritty? Yes, because then I am going to tell you how to use it in the examination. Not every information here is important, but how do we do it is more important. Okay, yes, okay, now see. The IIM model of 2017 was a very good example of one thing, was an example of autonomy. Further, here the board of governors were given full power. Now, if we don't take it just as an example of autonomy, we take it of non-governmental control, where the minimal presence, minimal presence of government. This was a very interesting model and it took a lot of what we call as deliberation for the government of India to come up with this also. Now this could have gone two ways. Either IIMs would have become an example of how this is a success story or how this has now become a failure. And basically the IIMs have somehow proved that too much autonomy is problematic. And this has now turned out to be a failure model. Now with failure, the problem is we are now moving for a totally contrast of this system, wherein the IIM model which is now going to be created for 2023 will not be based on minimal presence, but will be an example of governmental control and governance, and very simply here the power is going to be with the President of India. It's a modified concept of a central university, but now it is to us to see is this going to work or not work. But there are questions: should the government have so much power over the IIMs? It should have, should not have, all contemplation. As of right now, the government of India has course corrected. And let us see if this works or not, or this creates even more issues in the IIM as of right now. So are we clear with regards to what do you do with this information? Basically, you have two contrasting images within the same institution. First of governmental control, and the second one, or rather the non-governmental control, and the second one is governmental control. This is going to help you in assessing how much power should the government have in certain institutions or certain universities itself. Clear? If it is clear, we go to the third act, which is the Forest Act. Yes, great. Forest Conservation Act, what are the changes which are happening in it? Now, this is again a major issue which is going to come up, and Rajya Sabha has to discuss it. Lok Sabha has already passed this. Now what does this act actually say? See, there's a very important act which is called, and I'll give you the exact, Indian Forest Act 1927. Indian Forest Act 1927. Basically, it's a colonial act. Now please pay attention. You have to understand the issues which are involved in this. Now the Indian Forest Act 1927, what it does is, and what the British used to do, was that it used to designate certain areas as forests. So there was a formal definition and designation which was given to a certain area. For example, this is an area, and the government used to say that this much area is basically a forest. And there was also a concept which was called the deemed to be forest, in the sense that it was not as what we call as canopy density. Canopy density means when there's a tree, there are 2-3 trees together, this is called a canopy. So the canopy density was not that much, but it had a lot of vegetation. Now in independent India, we tend to use this concept only, that the government of India or the state governments could notify certain areas as forests under this act itself. So basically, if the government of India does not say that this is a forest, it is not a forest. However, what happened was that there was a major moment where the judiciary got involved, and basically in 1996, the Supreme Court said that this narrow definition of forest, or this concept of what we call as the government saying that it is a forest, is detrimental to our environment. And therefore, what the government of India said, or rather the Supreme Court said, was that the broadest definition of forest should be used, And within that broadest definition of forest, one thing should be very, very clear, that the states can automatically notify certain areas as forests. It should not be done within the restricted concept of the Indian Forest Act in 1927. And basically, if it has a lot of vegetation, it needs to be protected. And what do we mean by protected? Is that there cannot be no commercial activities, major construction activities, so you can't see that, major construction activities, these things cannot happen in forest or deemed to be forest. Very simply, we had a very restrictive concept of forest, we later expanded it, and the Supreme Court played a very important role in it, and therefore protected forest. And in India, therefore, there are three types of forests. One would be forest as notified by the Government of India, one would be deemed to be forest, and other than that, there is also certain areas which are not notified as forests but protected by the government. Very simply, there is an informal understanding that yes, these are also forests, we need to protect it. Are we clear with regards to this concept of forest, Indian Forest Act, and how we don't have to go into the nitty-gritty, don't start to learn canopy densities, that is irrelevant for your preparation. Very simply, we need to understand the concept here. The concept is the Supreme Court said broadest definition possible should be used. Okay, very good. Now, what this amendment has done, which has just been passed by the Lok Sabha yesterday, it is undoing a lot of things, in the sense that the 2023 bill which has come or which has been passed, it simply says that if an area has not been deemed as a forest, then major construction activities and commercial activities can happen. Very simply, the governments, the state governments and the Government of India did not take the hassle of notifying a lot of areas as forests, and now they are going back to the original, saying that if it is not notified as forest, it is not liable for protection. This means that now a lot of our forests are open to and available to construction activities and major commercial activities. This is a major movement because this can destroy a lot of local ecologies. So the first point is, this bill amendment in itself is problematic because it says if not notified as forest, not a forest. First thing, clear. What is the first major change? What is more, what we call as problematic is the second clause which is there. If not notified as forest, not a forest. This is the new concept. Previously it was keep it as open as possible so that everything can be protected under this purview. Now what the other section says, let me add to it also. See, the controversial Forest Conservation Amendment Bill with limited debate has been passed, and now it will open a lot of areas for commercial activities. See, the Supreme Court in 1996 very simply said that the forest includes all land recorded as such in government records, regardless of ownership, as deemed forests, which are not officially classified as forests but satisfy the dictionary meaning of the word. Any large area with significant tree cover and undergrowth. The court had asked the states to undertake this exercise of identifying and notifying. Very simply, the Supreme Court said if it says it is a forest or it looks like a forest, the broadest dictionary definition meaning of forest, if it satisfies it, then you protect it. However, the Government of India did not notify for the same. Now the bill says only those lands that were notified as forests under the Indian Forest Act of 1927 or other relevant law or were recorded as forest in the governmental records will be acknowledged as forest under this act. And therefore, this is the first major change. Very simply, not everything is notified as forest, but now the bill says if it is not notified as forest in governmental records, then it is not a forest. This is major. It basically undoes everything which has happened between 1996 and 2023, because previously we didn't care to notify because we knew that we are going to protect it. Now the problem is every area which was protected during this period without notification, it is now open for construction. So are we clear with regards to this part of the story? Yes. Okay. Now, the next issue is that, as I said, with not this definition of forest, it will open up it for commercial activities. The second part which is problematic is, it says the bill seeks to exempt linear infrastructure, basically anything which is more or less road-based activities, roads and highways, from seeking forest clearance permissions if they are located 100 kilometers from the national border. And therefore, what it is saying is, for example, we have the Pakistan border, we have the Bangladesh border, and we have the China border, Radcliffe line, McMahon line. Now, what it is saying is that 100 kilometers inside India, now the government of India can do highway and road building activities without seeking forest clearance permissions itself. Now they have not defined what is this concept of national importance, but this will create a lot of problems again. Now here the question is a little bit more complicated because it's a question between national security and basically forest conservation. But now we have to choose. You already know, and if you've been reading your environment, would it be right to say that most of the ecological sensitive zones are actually in bordering areas? Would I be right to say that? That most of the ecologically sensitive zones, for example, the tundra environment or forest covers, very important ecologies, would be very close to the border. Yes, because basically one whole sector is the Himalayas, then you have the Thar desert, and thereafter one whole sector, yes, from China is also the Shivalik range, the whole Himalayan sector. Bangladesh range would be then thereafter the Sundarbans, and thereafter, even if we take it island wise, very simply, the two major biomes and biosphere reserves are now under consideration of construction activities. Now, we are not capable enough, or we are not in a position to actually weigh in national security and forest conservation, because that is something which the government of India understands better. This is basically in response to what China is doing, because China very simply is building a lot of roads on its borders, and border roads and border infrastructure has now become very important. But in India, forest conservation created a lot of road impediments and generally impediments and problems for such activities, because forest clearance would never going to come. Now the point is, the tribals, the people of that area and the forest dwellers, what is going to happen to them is again something we need to think about. So this again, there's a tendency in UPSC aspirants that they come to conclusions very quickly. Understand one thing, it's a complicated matter. So I could have easily said that yes, we need to protect our borders, forests can be grown later also. Or afforestation can happen in other places, compensatory afforestation, Campa is there. But cutting down a tree in the Himalayas and then planting it in MP makes no sense. And I can go to the other extreme and also say that No, protecting the forest is most important. National security can be protected by new technology. Now, very simply, these are two extremes. But what makes your answer better than anyone else, or what gives you an edge, is to find a middle path. And the simple point is, the first provision is problematic. We can totally agree to this. I think you can agree with me that the first provision is problematic, wherein if we have not notified forest, then it's a problem. This is the problematic aspect of this bill. If not notified, it is not a forest, is actually problematic. Now, the second clause has both merits and demerits. And this is where you will play with the language or play with the examiner. That you will say that yes, on the one hand, with growing threats from China and with our border security being very, very important, this major amendment could allow for India to strengthen its national security and protect its border. But then there will come a very big however. However, the demerits are that this could open up the very protected ecological zones to commercial and construction activities, and that in turn could destroy those biomes, those ecology or their basic areas. We believe, and this is where you have to write it, we believe, or I don't write I because it becomes too personal, we believe that as of right now, national security is priority. Now don't justify your stance, but just write this line and you've taken a balanced position. That national security is priority. However, the government should be open for considerations if needed. Case to case basis they have to take. This protects you from going to either extremes. You have said both things. Yes, national security is important also, and also the fact that we also need to consider case to case basis. If it is, for example, in a very important national park, don't do it. But if it is important for protecting India, do it. Don't become NSA yourself. That no, I understand India's security better than anybody else. So don't do that. Because then that is a bit type of arrogance which is there. Try to give always a balanced answer. I think this is also right. I think that is also right. Clear? If this is clear, I'll give you a summary of the three things which we've done, and then we'll move to Prelims Bytes section. Small section, simple topics. Yes, okay. Three topics we've done. We've done three bills in that sense. We've done DPDP bill. We've done IIM bill. And we've done the Forest Amendment Bill. Now, what have we done in this? Very simply, in the DPDP bill, we discussed two major issues added to the others one. One was non-personal data. The other one was the fact that there is no complaint taking power, non-cognizance, suo motu cognizance cannot be taken for the Data Protection Board. The appointments and composition is also based by the Government of India, therefore the autonomy goes away. And the new issue is the dilution of the RTI Act, specifically 881J. The IIM bill, we discussed the issue of governance, wherein the IIMs were given a lot of autonomy in 2017. They did not submit their reports, took it very lightly, too much conflict in IIMs. So in 2023, now the Government of India is taking back a lot of power, and the visitors' position is going to be the way they are going to do it. And the Forest Amendment Bill, two major sections. If you are not notified as forest, then it is open to commercial activities. And second, and the most important, is that 100 kilometers inside the Indian border or from the border itself, a road or a highway can be made if it is of importance of national security, and nationally important or strategically important areas will now be constructed through the BRO, the Border Road Organization. The three things which we discussed. Is this clear? Perfect. Then we'll move to the three very simple, straightforward topics. Yes? Okay. Great. So, first one is for the students who are obsessed by or love to create repositories of information, which is you have another set of GI tags which have been given to certain institutions, or rather certain commodities in that sense. So geographical indication, if you remember, if you just to refresh your basic memory of art and culture, GI is given to a commodity, to any product coming from a certain area. The most important concept, GI is like the brother or sister of, for example, trademark or copyright. But GI, the most peculiar concept is that GI is not given to an individual but to a community or to an area or to a state. And second, it is not that stringent in, it cannot be stringently applied in courts. Basically, you cannot drag a person for the breach of GI, though the registrar of GI can actually reprimand and also take away that tag. But the most important peculiarity of GI is that you get a GI because the geographical origin of that product or commodity gives it a certain quality and characteristic, which is then protected by the GI tag, and it allows for better commercial and what we call as international presence, sale, and what we call as identity. Very simply, if a certain thing, for example, the Bikaneri craft, this now has a GI tag, so anybody who is crafting this in Bikaner will have the right to stamp it on their product that it is GI protected or GI recognized, and if it goes out of India, it can be given that specific name itself. So GI is not something which is specific to the product, it is specific to the area it comes from. That is why geographical indicator. Geographical origin gives it a certain certain characteristic, which is then protected and given recognition. So it's a part of recognition. It's a recognition based concept. So you have two from Goa, the Goan mango and the bebenika, which is a pudding, which is considered the queen of Goan deserts itself. So two products from Goa. Thereafter, you have from Rajasthan metalwork as it is one of the most beautiful in the world itself. So Udaipur, Bikaner, Jodhpur, and Bikaner having two. One the Kasidkari, the other one the Ustakala craft. Now what do you do with this information? I leave it to you. Because by the time you give the examination, there will be another set of GIs which will be given. And as of right now, it was 432 GI. The list is 432. Add these, it will reach 500 by the time you give the examination. So just create a repository of the latest ones which are in the news itself. That is why I'm giving it to you, and just revise it once before going to the examination. GIs used to come that way in the exam. Now they're not asking a question, but why not? So just add this to your repository, but don't start to learn from 1 to 400. That is a waste of your time. Thereafter, the Lok Sabha has passed a bill on birth registration, and is again a birth and registration amendment bill. It is interesting because this single document, and this is the basic point, once a child will be born, a single document, a single birth certificate will be given, which could then be used, firstly given digitally, for anything and everything. See, as of right now, our parents, people who've been born in 80s, 70s, don't have birth certificates. But after 1992, 1991, it is more or less mandatory to have a birth certificate. Very simply, now they will give digital birth certificates which can be used for educational institutions, driving license, governmental jobs, Aadhaar, and marriages. There's a lot of controversy behind it. I don't want to go into it because that is not what our task is. The simple point is, now there will be a single document which could be used very simply as a proof of birth everywhere, which is not true as of right now. Last, something where we see that the government of India and the states are in a tussle. So cooperative and competitive federalism. See, under Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme or Act, 60% of the cost of the wages is borne by the state, by the center, and 40% by the state itself. And a question was raised in the parliament that why is that in West Bengal not a lot of the MGNREGA workers have got their the wages or salaries. What is the reason for that? So what the government of India has revealed, simply the minister has revealed that close to 6,000 crores is pending from the center to be sent to the states, and very simply 2,000 crores is just owed to West Bengal itself. And why that money has not been sent is because there is non-compliance of directive from central government. Very simply, there's a lot of politics which is happening over this, that why is that only Rajasthan and West Bengal are the two major states which have not got the money, ironically having non-BJP governments. The basic point of the matter is that MGNREGA is a very important scheme in India, and playing this type of politics with it makes no sense. And very simply, why am I discussing this with you? Just to discuss one simple thing, 60-40 MGNREGA. Second thing, there is a lot of politics which is happening over these schemes. Simply lot of money pending from the center to the state and now being used as a tactic to very simply make states compliant to certain things. So, before we go to the mains questions, very simply, what have we done today? IIM Bill, we've done the DPDP Bill, and we've done the Forest Acts or the Forest Amendment Act. All of them create a lot of different questions related to governance, accountability, transparency, governmental control, non-governmental control. These three, very simple, GI tags have been given to certain Goan and Rajasthan products. Second, birth certificate, when it will be available, we will see. And last but not the least, MGNREGA. This is I am discussing with you for a very simple reason. Remember the 60-40 split, that is it. This I leave it to you. You will get the transcript of this. If not, you can take a screenshot of this, keep it with you. It will help you later. As of right now, of no purpose to you. When you reach the prelims period, then this compilation will help you generally. Okay, with this, let's look at the mains questions. The first question, the amendment to the IIM Act raises concerns over autonomy of institutions and governmental oversight. Comment. This is a very interesting question because this will help you in learning how to balance a question, because balancing is something very, very important. Second, what are the implications of the amendment to the Forest Act? So this is GS paper 2, this is GS paper 3. So I hope you will be able to answer these questions. With this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much for your patience. I'll see you tomorrow, today, tomorrow and day after. I am there only with CNA. So see you tomorrow, same time. Bye-bye. Take care.